All right, let's get this deep dive started. Today we're going to be talking about, well, bubble tea. And, you probably know it as like that super customizable drink
Uh,
with those, with the tapioca pearls and all the different flavors. But have you ever thought about like where it actually came from? That's what we're going to be looking at today. And we're going to be using a BBC Learning English video to kind of trace its history.
hmm
It's really interesting. Went from like this tiny little thing in Taiwan to like everywhere.
Yeah, it's everywhere. And it's actually pretty interesting that the source is from the BBC. Like, the UK, they have like a pretty strong tea culture of their own, right? Like even with all the coffee that's popular now, the BBC says something like 59% of Brits still choose tea pretty regularly.
Wow.
So it really makes you wonder, maybe that love of tea in the UK already kind of helped bubble tea succeed over there.
That's a great point. It really does seem like even with all the like fancy coffee shops and all that, people still really love tea. Like maybe it's that sense of like comfort or nostalgia or something.
Maybe. It's like how cultural identity like influences what we eat and drink,
Yeah.
And in some ways like bubble tea almost feels like a modern take on British tea tradition in a way, right?
Yeah, I see that. The BBC video actually mentioned how like iced tea and matcha are pretty popular in Britain now. So maybe bubble tea was just like, the next step in that kind of evolution of tea.
It's really fascinating how these, food and drink trends change over time, but like with bubble tea, you always know what it is because of that one special ingredient, the chewy tapioca balls.
Oh yeah. Speaking of which, I've always been curious about that word. Chewy when it comes to food. What actually makes food chewy? Is it a certain ingredient? Like how do you make something chewy?
It's really all about the texture when you think about it. So like tapioca pearls, they get that chewiness because of all the starch in them. So like imagine like a tiny little springy ball that kind of, like pushes back a little when you bite it.
Yeah.
And that texture just adds a whole other level to the drinking experience, don't you think?
Oh, for sure. It's like every sip is just a little bit of fun. The video compared the tapioca pearls to paella being the signature dish of Spain.
Yeah.
And it got me thinking, like, what makes a food or drink so iconic that it represents a whole place like that?
Yeah. It's usually like a bunch of things together, I think. Often it's something that like has deep roots in the region, historically. Sometimes it's about ingredients that are only found in that specific place, and then almost always there's a story behind it, like something that people connect with and it just becomes part of their culture.
Yeah. Okay. So let's get into the story behind bubble tea.
Yeah.
So the BBC video said it all started with this tea shop owner from Taiwan. His name was Liu Hanxi, and he was on a trip to Japan and saw people drinking iced milk tea and got inspired.
That's cool. And what's interesting is that Taiwan already had like a pretty big tea culture of its own. So it wasn't just about bringing a new drink to Taiwan. It was more about like making something familiar, new, and like the big aha moment happened when he took that inspiration from Japan and combined it with tapioca balls he found at a market in Taiwan.
I love those stories, those moments of like surprise inspirations. Like he took these two really normal things
Yeah.
and just made something totally new and exciting, and it gets even better. So apparently bubble tea like exploded in popularity when celebrities like Michael Jordan and Jackie Chan started going to his tea shop.
Wow.
Yeah.
I wonder if that was planned or if it was just luck. It really shows how much celebrities can like put something on the map. Like the BBC actually said it spread like wildfire. I think that's a really good way to describe it.
Yeah, they even had a quote from Liu Anxi himself. He said, "Pearl milk tea got huge media coverage and it spread like wildfire. But I always say we have many other products, and the reason pearl milk tea became so popular was pure luck. It was a miracle."
That's pretty humble, isn't it? Like you'd think he'd take more credit for starting something so big. But maybe he has a point. Maybe there is some element of luck in how some things just become so successful.
It really does make you think about how unpredictable trends are.
Doesn't it? It also makes you think like, what if it wasn't tapioca? What if he had tried something else from that market in Taiwan?
Oh, wow. Like, what if bubble tea as we know it almost didn't happen? That's crazy to think about.
Yeah, it's wild to think that like bubble tea almost didn't happen, but I guess that's part of what makes its origin story so interesting. Like it almost feels like a happy accident or something. Yeah, yeah, it does. But we can't forget about the an innovation part of it too, right? Like
Yeah.
he didn't just like trip and fall into this combination, you know. He was experimenting, like actively trying to find new ways to make tea even better. And I think that's something really important for our listeners to remember. Like a lot of times innovation comes from taking something we already know and combining it with something unexpected.
That's a really good point. And speaking of innovation, I was thinking, like the fact that tapioca itself doesn't really have a strong flavor, that was probably a big part of bubble tea's success. It was like a blank canvas for flavors, which is probably why we see so many different kinds of bubble tea now.
Yeah, definitely. That neutral taste lets you do so much with it, like fruity flavors, creamy stuff, even savory options.
Yeah.
It really shows how such a simple ingredient can lead to like endless possibilities.
Totally. And it makes you wonder, what if it had a really strong flavor?
Hmm.
Like maybe bubble tea wouldn't have become as popular or as adaptable.
That's interesting. Maybe a strong flavor would made it like too
Yeah.
specific, you know? But because tapioca is so neutral, it can kind of fit anywhere.
I never thought of it like that. It's amazing how something so simple can make such a big difference.
Yeah, and we can't forget about how it looks, right? Like those colorful layers and those tapioca balls like bobbing up and down. It's basically made for Instagram, you
For
know?
sure. The way it looks is a huge part of its popularity,
That's it.
especially now with everyone on social media.
Totally. Like every cup is like a little piece of art. It's
Yeah.
a way for people to show their personality, even with something as simple as a drink.
I like that it's like a food selfie or something. And it makes me think about how bubble tea shops themselves have become like social places. It's not just about getting a drink. It's about hanging out with friends, taking pictures, like sharing the experience.
You're right. It's not just a drink anymore. It's a whole cultural thing. Like it's part of how we interact with each other online and in person.
So we've talked about the origin story, the role of chance, the innovation, how it looks. But it's still crazy to me how it went from this small thing in Taiwan to being everywhere.
It is. It really shows how trends can go beyond borders. You know, like think about it. It started in Taiwan, got inspiration from Japan, and then spread to places like South Korea and China. And from there, it just kept going.
Like it's almost like it tapped into this universal desire for something fun and delicious and something you can customize. It shows how connected our world has become.
Exactly. And in a way, bubble tea represents that connection. It's like a mix of cultures and flavors and ideas. It shows that even though we're all different, we can still like enjoy the same thing.
And it just keeps changing. Like all the time, there are new flavors, new variations popping up. It's like the bubble tea world is constantly evolving.
Which is really incredible when you think about it. It shows how something can start so small and then just take on a life of its own. Like a constant reminder that even in a world that feels so full, there's always room for creativity and new experiences.
Yeah, it's like bubble tea has become this symbol of like our globalized world, like a mix of cultures and tastes that everyone just seems to love.
Yeah, and it's interesting to think about like what it means for Taiwan, you know, like where it came from. It's become something they're really proud of, a symbol of how like creative and ingenious Taiwanese culture is.
Right. It's not just a drink. It's like it represents them to the world.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how something that started so small could become like a global thing that everyone knows.
And you know, talking about global recognition, it's pretty significant that the BBC like made a video about it for people learning English. It shows how much it's become part of mainstream culture, even in a place like the UK, which has like its own really strong tea traditions.
Totally. It really shows how food and drinks can connect people from different cultures. Like we started this deep dive talking about how almost 60% of Brits still choose tea regularly. Who knows, maybe bubble tea will become just as normal in Britain someday.
I wouldn't be surprised. And thinking about those Brits and their tea, you know, it makes you wonder, maybe part of the reason bubble tea is so popular worldwide is because it's connected to tea. Like tea is something familiar and comforting, right? So maybe that makes bubble tea easier to like, even if you've never been to Taiwan or anything.
That's a really good point. It's like it takes something familiar and adds this fun modern spin to it.
Exactly. And it goes back to what we were saying about innovation. Bubble tea took tea, which people have been drinking for centuries, and made it new and exciting for today.
Okay, so as we're wrapping up our bubble tea deep dive, what are some of the key things you hope our listeners take away from this?
Well, I think the main thing is that bubble tea's story isn't just about like a lucky break. It's about innovation, about sharing between cultures, and about how trends can be so unpredictable. It's like a reminder that sometimes the best things come from trying something new and different.
I love that. It's a reminder to be open to new experiences and to like appreciate all the creativity that goes into the things we enjoy every day. So, here's a question for you, dear listener. If you could invent a new food or drink, what would be the special ingredient? And what story would you want it to tell?
That's a good one. Would it be like a mix of different cultures, or maybe inspired by a childhood memory, or maybe you discover it by accident in your kitchen?
The possibilities are endless. And, who knows, maybe your creation will become the next big thing, just like bubble tea. All right, everyone, that's it for our deep dive today. Keep those minds curious and those taste buds adventurous. And hey, maybe go grab yourself a bubble tea to celebrate.